This is Gene Krebs.
Hi there. Oh. Whoosh.
And we're high on Ohio.
We're going around this great state talking to people who know how things work, people who are trying to make this state a better state. And it's my good pleasure to be in here today talking to Greg Lawson of the Buckeye Institute. And Greg, we've worked together in the past, and in a Center for Community Solutions, the Buckeye Institute, and some other groups around Ohio have long had an interest in tax credits, tax expenditures, tax loopholes, tax giveaways, or you could call them economic business development grants. All right?
All in the eye of the beholder.
All in the eye of the beholder. So tell us, what does your eye behold with this, and how do you see this thing shaking out eventually?
Well, I think tax expenditures, there's always a reason why they're put into place. Basically, it's always an exception to the existing tax code. It's a specific carve-out that essentially allows a limited break for whether it's income type tax. I mean, it goes both for income and sales tax. But we see this happen, and we understand that people want to use it for economic development purposes, yada, yada, yada. But we think that it actually jumbles up our tax code. It makes it very complicated.
Was that
and that's
bad?
Not good.
Is that a
Absolutely.
bad thing? Why is that a bad thing?
If you talk,
now, by the way, that's a good softball coming in here, light up over the plate for
yes.
you. Now, knock it out of the park.
Look, the tax code, good economists will always tell you that the best kind of tax code is a simple tax code. It should be a low rate on a broad base. It makes it very understandable to individuals. It makes it understandable to businesses. Makes it easy for compliance purposes. And it also makes it non-distortive. That's kind of fancy speak that economists use, but it's basically what you don't want to have happen is you don't want the tax code to make an undue influence, typically, on the kind of decisions that people make. We want people to be able to make personal decisions about what kind of jobs they have, the income that they do, where they invest, and things of that nature, what they buy. We want them to be able to make that decision in as honest a way as possible. And whenever you do things with the tax code that favors things or disfavors things, you're actually putting your finger on the scales, and you're helping to make a choice that may not be a natural choice, and we don't think that's a good thing. So we want to keep it low and broad so that we can, because we need revenue, we know the government needs a certain amount of revenue to function, but we want it to be done in a way that doesn't create problems.
So you're not out to abolish government the way some of your opponents say you are?
A lot of people think the Buckeye Institute would want to get rid of all government. That's simply not true. Okay. Government is an absolutely essential thing. It has to exist. I mean, if you didn't have government, you couldn't have businesses interacting at all because you don't have the ability to come in and enforce contracts, the ability to adjudicate certain things that
you wouldn't know where private property is. We have a private property rights,
yes.
But you have no idea without the court and the courthouse to know whose private property
absolutely.
Is where.
So it's absolutely essential, and I think it's very important that people understand that all we're saying at the Buckeye Institute is that government should remain in its proper role. There are things that it can do, and there's things that we have a great deal of skepticism about.
Now, I want to go back to the tax expenditure discussion for a moment. It is ironic in Ohio, we have a income in Ohio of about $7.7 billion of income tax revenue. And we also have almost the exact same amount in tax expenditures. How do you guys feel about a tax expenditure audit where we go in and we analyze each one, kind of do a return on investment, that type of stuff? Are you guys okay with something like that? A process to look at that?
The Buckeye Institute has worked with a number of groups. I think the Center for Community Solutions is one, and several other organizations that we have here in Ohio. And yes, we have essentially said that we think that's an excellent idea. We think it's extremely important that there be a return on investment. It is conceivable, whereas we are philosophically supportive of, again, having the most simplified tax code we can. But it is conceivable that you could have certain things that maybe on a temporary basis may be necessary for something. Sometimes it's hard for me to envision what that might be.
Right.
But we're willing to at least explore that. But the problem we have in Ohio is that there's not a systematic, at least legislative, oversight. These things are reviewed by the tax department, the tax commissioner, and the administration every budget cycle. And then you get legislation that creates new ones, but you don't have an ongoing analysis of what they have done. And this is really interesting because we have some that have been on the books for 50, 60 or more years.
1919 for some.
Well, there you go. Almost 100 years.
Yeah.
And you got to ask yourself, is a tax loophole that was created 100 years ago Maybe it still works. Maybe. I have a great deal of skepticism about that. But we should at least have a process to look at that. So we think that this is an absolutely essential thing because we want to unclutter the tax code.
Now, Representative Terry Booz out of Huron County has introduced House Bill 24 to go ahead and start this process of looking at these various tax expenditures. Do you guys have an official stand on?
Well, we don't. We never actually support or not
You don't
support
really
specific
lobby, do you?
legislation. We don't lobby. What we do though is we can talk about policy issues writ large.
Okay.
And so what we can do is we can say, do we think something makes sense as a matter of policy in a general sense? But we never say you should vote for this bill, you shouldn't vote for this bill. But we think we should be able to educate. I mean, that's what a think tank does, is be able to provide that information in context within which legislators and policymakers can make decisions. To that extent, we think that anything that allows us the opportunity to reasonably do this. I mean, you always have to look at how it is done too. I mean, the ability to have whether it's a commission, a committee, or whatever, it can be a complicated process. And there's so many of these things that to do it right, you probably have to do it on a rolling basis. It's probably not feasible to do all of them in 1 year and things like that.
Right.
But as a matter of general concept, we think there should be a review. I think Representative Booth is on target to be raising this issue. I mean, we've had conversations. In fact, I think we may have even had conversations collaboratively with Representative Booth. And I think that we are in a situation where we need to keep this issue front and center. Okay. And there's other bills, I think, that have been out there, quite frankly. The Representative Booth is a Republican, but I think several Democrat legislators have introduced it. Representative Foley and Representative Driehaus, I believe, out of Cincinnati, have done something a little bit much different mechanics on how it would actually be operationalized, but conceptually, it's there.
Greg, there's several topics we could be sitting here and talking about, but one of them is, of course, welfare reform, Medicaid reform. You folks have fairly strong feelings about Medicaid and Medicaid reform. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. I think the first thing to understand is we very much recognize that Ohio has had a huge chasm in terms of who it's been able to, how we have coverage for certain individuals. And we understand that the lack of insurance is a problem for a good chunk of people in the state. So we know that something has to be done. It's not enough to say no to something and then not try to offer some legitimate alternatives. So, but we don't think Medicaid, as it's currently constructed in the Medicaid expansion, as it's now occurred, was the right path to take. Medicaid, we already have a robust Medicaid program for certain populations in the state. Children have already been covered under either Medicaid or the CHIP program, up to 200% of the federal poverty level. Individuals in what they call the age blind and disabled category, elderly and disabled again, they have already been covered. And we have certain populations, pregnant women, certain families, have already been covered in the pre-expansion population of Medicaid. So we made a decision here in Ohio to cover these people. We thought that was prudent, and we think that should have continued and should continue. The problem with the expansion that we have seen is that population has a wide range of different kinds of folks in there. And quite frankly, yes, many of them do work, and I think that is true, but a lot of them have some challenges. We recognize that there are addiction issues, there's mental health issues that sometimes prevent people from working. But as we've seen the exchanges from the Affordable Care Act come into play, we'll see how those continue to go. I know there's some problems with websites and signups and things like that at the national level, but you really only have to work a minimum wage job to get to the income level that's necessary to qualify for heavily subsidized insurance in the exchange as it currently is constructed. Our point all along was, why are we going to cover a good chunk of these people in the way that Medicaid does it when we can try to shift people into the exchanges where they're already going to get coverage, private coverage? We think that that's going to probably be better than what Medicaid is for a whole host of reasons. And then what we should do is have a more targeted focus on these individuals in a way that will also incentivize them to stay in the workforce and work and move up that chain. The fear that we have is that Medicaid could become very much like old welfare was before it was turned into the reforms of the mid-1990s that turned it into TANF. We think the temporary assistance for needy families, we think that this has a chance. We've seen evidence in other states where people have dropped out of the labor force, largely because of government insurance programs. We don't think that's a moral thing to do, to create what could amount to a crutch and a permanent safety hammock as opposed to a true safety net. So we think we need to incentivize that. Unfortunately, Medicaid, because of the way the federal government manages it and because of the strings that are attached, coming out of Washington, D.C., Ohio doesn't have the flexibility to put things like work requirements or even work training requirements in there. That is a massive problem that is going to create, we think, a real challenge for our labor force in Ohio in the long run.
Now, you brought up peripherally mental health. As I go around and talking to people, there are two consistent themes that keep coming up. One of them is mental health. The other one's early childhood nutrition. Okay. In talking to some folks on the criminal justice side, I'm getting a sense from them they kind of feel like if we can solve some of our mental health issues in Ohio, it's just kind of like the unified field theory in quantum mechanics.
Well, we're talking Stephen Hawking now here.
Yeah. So what it does is
everything.
that so many our court system is in effect getting clogged up with people who actually have mental health issues. Have you guys done any research on that? How do you guys feel about mental health types of issues? How do you feel is the best way to approach it? I mean, you talk about yesterday we talked about return on investment.
Yes.
And what I'm picking up from folks, and keep in mind that I'm the guy who offered the 3 strikes and you're out bill, okay, in my first term. And I will still believe there's about 1 to 2% of the male cohort, which is are very problematic. They turn around 50, you know. But mental health there's a lot of research that's pointing to this stuff. How do you guys feel about all of this?
Well, I think you're right. I think that we do have a need to assure that we aren't just dropping people out. I mean, quite frankly, if you walk around the State House in downtown, you can see some folks that are probably homeless, and that's a real tragedy. And some of these folks, you can tell there's something not quite right, and that's always a sad thing. We've even had. I actually am struck by the fact that just a little over a year ago, there was actually a case of a person who wasn't on their medication. They were truly literally a paranoid schizophrenic. They stabbed several people in the building right across from my parking garage, and they were shot by a police officer like a block away from where we're sitting right now.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a very dramatic event, and this person clearly had, this wasn't mental health issues of an extreme nature. So yes, we do, however, I will say, is there improvements and things that we probably need to do? Yes, we do get a lot of block grants from the federal government.
But how do we get there?
Well, I think one thing that we do is we try to coordinate the care with, we have insurance companies, we try to get people into the managed care, and I know that's part of what Medicaid is attempting to do now, is working to do that. But we have already a decent amount of resources that come in, again, from the federal government. There's several block grants that come in from the feds that goes exclusively to this. I know the state has done a bit of picking up of some of, I believe, the local money to match stuff to draw down additional federal dollars. And I think that there is an effort to try to already do some of that. I do think that the funding is going to always be an issue. We're going to always have to have some of a conversation there about that. Our fear consistently is that we can talk about that group, we can talk about how do we fund that without having to wrap that into the overarching Medicaid issue we were talking about earlier. Because I think that we have a lot of people, out of that population that we're expanding to, I don't think that we're looking at that the mental health issue, where that is part of that population, I don't believe that that is the majority of the population. So when we always hear that conversation, I think that we're taking that and we're lumping it in to sell a policy that is going to be dealing with a lot of other people outside of that.
Are you calling then for a carve out then of mental health as more as a standalone issue?
I think we should look at it as, and we have historically, again, we have funding that comes in. So I think to that extent, we should really focus very closely on that without having to lump that directly into the entire way we've done Medicaid.
But I mean, from a practical standpoint, how would that work?
Well, I think that we already have, we do still have some facilities that are there. We have a lot of outpatient services, and we have the county boards that deal with that. Again, I think that as the money comes in, we need to empower those organizations that are already in existence. We've had them for years, you know, and we have to have some conversations potentially. You know, we had, now we do all the stuff where we've pushed people out into the community, and we're not necessarily saying it's time to redo institutionalization or anything
Right.
necessarily, but that may be a conversation that some people have. You know, we have to be careful not to be penny wise and pound foolish on this.
Okay.
And I think that you do run some risks that we've seen folks discharge. We don't want to see things like, again, I mentioned that one case. We don't want to see what happened just the other day
In Virginia.
with
Right.
State Senator Craig Deed's son. There's
Right.
a very bad story coming out about that. It appears, some of the information is still out there. I
Just
don't know all the
wasn't room.
details.
There was no room.
But there was literally no room in
Right.
facilities, and he was released, and the next day he stabs and nearly kills his father and then kills himself.
Right. So
Terrible.
let me ask this question then. Being a fiscal watchdog organization, what is the appropriate amount of money? Looking at the amount of money that is spent right now, both at the local level, Ohio's a, try and compare one state to another, as you and I both know,
Apples
is
and
fraught
oranges.
with danger. Because Ohio is so reliant upon locally generated
Yes.
millages. Now, that also creates a problem.
Yes.
Because Benton County has
No property value to
it has
do
no
it, yeah.
tax base.
Exactly.
40% of it's in the Wayne National Forest, and their only business I'm aware of there is Red's Coffee and Sandwich Shop. I'm not kidding. I think that's really about their only source of tax revenue coming through, as far as sales tax goes. So looking at, then you compare it to Dublin, which is just, a wash in money, literally and figuratively.
New Albany and
New
all
Albany.
kinds of places, sure.
All right, and Franklin County is very well to do. I mean, yes, huge problems, but so you look at this, so from a state that does things on both the local level and the state then passing through money, and then we have the federals passing through. The question is, how much money should we be spending on mental health issues in Ohio?
And I think actually, to give the administration a credit, I believe what they've tried to do with raising some of that local levy to match the dollars that come through the department, if my understanding is correct, the state is taking, since the Kasich administration has come into office, a more
Right.
active role in the management on the mental health side of things. I think we probably are going to have to continue going in that direction because you do raise some of the fractionalization issues.
Right.
And we know from local governments, there's some interesting questions about whether or not we have too many,
Right.
what we need to do about that, and if
Right.
if we address those issues for other types of things, for
Right.
economic competitiveness, that's going to then impact, though, the delivery mechanisms
Right.
on how the services are delivered. I think the state ultimately is probably going to have to play that role of drawing up some of the funding. What funding does come in from the feds that we currently have is going to have to be managed at the state level. Now, if you want a dollar amount,
Right.
I'm not sure that I have a dollar amount off the top of my head.
But
so I
later
don't
on,
have
can
one.
we get one? We'll
But
come back. I want to
you wanna come back and do that.
I
Let's
wanna
talk
come
about
back.
the dollar
I want
amount.
to come back. I want to come back, and it's not just you, but I want to come back. And there are a couple of themes that keep emerging from all these. One is early childhood nutrition. I get that from both the semi-socialist left and the very, very, very ultra-libertarian right. Is childhood nutrition. The other thing I keep picking up from folks, and it may be a result of research, is this whole issue of mental health issues. Seeing you have there a Tim Hortons cup, I carry with me these little things it's a $5 gift
Yes.
certificate for Tim Hortons.
Yes.
And what I do is...
Can I have that, by the way? No.
Yes. No, actually, I'm giving this to you, and here's the reason why. I hand those out to homeless people when I see them here in downtown Columbus. And because you're always getting approached by them, give me
Yes.
money, I'm hungry, okay. So what I do is, and my religion is very, very firm, I have to support those less fortunate than me. At the same time, if you give them money, it may end up with
Going
crack
into
cocaine.
the wrong location.
Right. Okay. So, and I found, much to my surprise, by giving them a gift certificate, gift card, $5 is all, and talking to them later, they'll stop me and they'll say, they get to go into that Tim Hortons, and they get to be just like everybody else.
Yeah.
That in America, there's no excuse for going to bed hungry. We have soup kitchens and food banks everywhere,
True.
and you can go hungry, but you have to do certain things to avoid getting fed at these things.
Well, you're raising some very interesting points, and this is something that I think we all do need to talk about. Is whereas I do think the state can needs to play a certain role in the coordination because
Right.
we have to be careful with so many entities, and the fractionalization makes there be inefficiencies and inability, even when there's money in the system. It doesn't mean the money is being spent intelligently
Right.
and wisely. But you hit at something quite telling. What you're doing here is an act of pure charity.
Yes.
And
But I did it for myself.
right.
But I have found that, much to my surprise, it's having a unexpected impact on them that I never anticipated.
And it's a good impact.
It's a good impact.
And this is something, one of the things that's influenced me, a thinker that I think is an important thinker, is Edmund Burke. Not to get too philosophical or anything with viewers who may not be familiar with Edmund Burke, but he was a conservative in England, had some very interesting
for a long
views.
time now.
He's been dead. He was 1700s. He was around at the time of the Revolution. As a matter of fact, he supported the American revolutionaries against the crown.
Or very sympathetic to it.
Yep. But he was against the French Revolution, for example, because he recognized the radicalism and the danger that was unleashed in the French Revolution, and wrote a very famous book on that. But the bottom line is he talks a lot about intermediary institutions, essentially charities and churches and those organizations. And I've had the fortune in some other endeavors I've been involved with outside of Buckeye to really get engaged in some local talking to people in the city of Columbus. And there's a lot of poverty in Columbus. The Columbus City Schools, over 80% of students live in a poverty situation. We have to address those things. But here's the thing that the Buckeye Institute and the free market advocates, I think, want to consistently raise is government the entity that can do it. We now have all these questions whether you're for it or you're against it. The Affordable Care Act, there's certainly implementation issues. Even the president's stated that he didn't do a particularly good job, and I think even people of his own party have raised questions about that. Now, that can happen in anything. Big companies can fail too, but here's the question. Government is not necessarily the entity that can do it. These civic groups that Burke talks about, they can because they're doing exactly what you just did.
Yes, but I will flat out tell you that I'm the only one doing this, but you are now. But so it's still.
This will go to somebody.
It's a thin solution yet. I'm sitting down here with Greg Lawson of the Buckeye Institute. By the way, what is your title here?
It's a very long one. Officially, it's State House Liaison and Policy Analyst.
Okay, all right. Okay, I'll have to
Try saying that 5 times in a row real fast.
Yeah, I'll wake up here again in a moment. All right, now, you do an awful lot of work, though, in local government data. You guys have you host something on your website, which is, what's your website again?
www.buckeyeinstitute.org.
And you guys have a lot of stuff on your data. You have you've told me this several years ago, a personally very hilarious story about trying to gather some data in Marion County.
We have, and we have another story too. But my experience was I was working on a report about local government issues, and there's an awful lot of questions about how we spend money at the local level and the number of entities that we have and the efficiencies that we can have there, and what does that mean for taxes. So I was trying to get some information from a township. I don't remember the name of the township now, but there's a series of townships in Marion County. I was just trying to get information about what their purchases were, what their budget really was, and what they were spending money on. And so I'd reached out to the fiscal officer. Obvious, easy thing to do. Public records request, they have to give you the information. Well, they didn't give me the information, and it was handwritten, so this isn't a spreadsheet. I mean, I guess I was anticipating that it would be literally an Excel file or on a CD, or at least a printout of an Excel spreadsheet.
Right.
It wasn't. It was handwritten lines, handwritten numbers, and a little note, and it was basically on a napkin.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, they didn't have a lot of money in the township. They weren't spending a lot of money, so they could fit it on a napkin, which says one thing. But it was very striking because this was just some person putting stuff, I don't even know where they had it. They could have had it in their garage for all I know, the fiscal officer of this township. And it was just really a telling story to me of, this is technically a public official. This is public information. It was difficult to get it. Took several outreach efforts. It wasn't easy. And then when I got it in that kind of a format. There's no standardization. No ability. It's very difficult. I mean, how do you look at that and then look at other information from other entities and then try to make comparisons? It's really, really difficult to do that. And we just had another example. We do salary databases for the state, teachers. We're expanding our local database to some of the big urban areas, some of the big cities in Ohio. And I had one of our staff reach out to Youngstown, actually, and to just get the names of employees, the position, and the department they worked in, and their salary. Pretty simple information. You'd think that whatever your payroll thing would shoot it out, and you could put it in a spreadsheet. Well, they sent a PDF document that was a scan. It wasn't even like a generated off the computer. It was a scan from a hard copy that didn't even have all the information we'd asked for. And they basically said they couldn't get us the information the years we were asking for because it was all in a mainframe computer. They've upgraded now. Okay. So now they can get us the information on a going forward prospective basis. But they couldn't get us anything beforehand because the only person...
What year?
We were going through 2012.
Oh, my.
Yeah, we're talking about like, we were asking for,
We're not talking
10, 11,
1912, we're talking
No.
2012.
Yeah, we're talking about just the last several years. We weren't going back very far even.
Wow.
And they said from 2013 on, we've moved over. We can get you the new stuff. We can't get you this. You can come up and check the paper files and stuff, but the guy who could run this is no longer there.
But doesn't this get them into direct conflict with the open record statute?
Well, we can pursue, we're debating about whether or not we want to do, I mean, you can grab the tapes, you can grab certain things, and we can go up there. The problem is if they don't actually have the record, they only give you what they actually physically have. If they can't create the new one, but they have to have it because it's in the system.
Right.
So the question is, how do they do it? And
They have to make it accessible to you.
They have to make it accessible.
The same argument can be made, oh, I'm sorry, it's in the warehouse on the outskirts of town, and none of us have a car.
A key.
Yeah, none of us have a car we can use today to go fetch it for you, nor we will have a car this week. No, we all walk to work. Yeah.
We are, and that's actually one of the things we can push this a little further because of the Ohio Sunshine Law. So I don't doubt that we can actually obtain the information.
Yeah.
The interesting thing, though, is every other entity. I mean, this is Youngstown, so I mean, it's not Columbus, it's not the one of 3 Cs, but it's still Youngstown, still a big city. It's much bigger than most cities.
75,000 population.
So we're talking about that they literally had only one person who could get the information, and we're not trying to rag on them and make them out to be terrible people or anything.
Right.
I mean, but this gets to the point of transparency.
Yeah.
And from the Buckeye Institute's perspective, transparency is important because you want to know where tax dollar resources go, and so that you can feel like you're actually getting the value. If you're going to have government do what it must do, you must be able to hold it accountable, but you can't hold something accountable if you don't have the information to do it. This is not the only way of doing it, but it's an important way of doing it for taxpayers. People love our salary databases. And this shows, holy smokes, if a big city can't do it, what does this tell us about the other ones? So now we're seeing a township that's really small who sends stuff on napkins, and we're having a city that can't produce, or at least certainly not in an easy way, produce very simple information that should be as easy as pie to get and kick out into an Excel spreadsheet or a common or limited file or something like that. It should be simple. And my guy had several conversations, and actually, the staff member that they were interacting with, I think, was a little perturbed that we were kind of pushing on that.
How dare you?
Exactly, and I think that's one of the things that we have to change. And there are some bills out in the General Assembly right now. I know State Representative Mike Duffy and State Representatives Duffy and Representative Hagan have introduced a very interesting bill that looks at data. I guess it's several bills actually.
Several bills.
It looks,
House Bill 321, 322, 323, and 324.
It's a very interesting idea, and again, it's about transparency and getting information out there. And to us, the ability to get it out there, however it's done, whether it's these bills or it's another bills, there's been several other ideas and several other legislators that have in recent years, largely I think thanks to the work that we started and that others have now done. The Treasurer now has a salary database. Some other organizations do it as well. But Buckeye really was the first one that did that on a consistent basis. And now people realize how important that is.
Okay.
But we need a mechanism to do that, and it's going to be pulling teeth for a while to get there. But the only way people can know what they're getting is to get the information. And then as we move forward, we got to be able to put it into a format where you can make the apples to apples comparisons, or as close to it as possible. Data gets really difficult sometimes because not everybody does things the same way.
And I will leave us with this one quote by Mark Twain: "There are lies, damned lies, and there are statistics." Also, Mark Twain said this about Cincinnati, that he wanted to be in Cincinnati when the apocalypse hit because everything happened there 10 years later. We've been having this week a delightful conversation with Greg Lawson of the Buckeye Institute. And Greg, we have a section here that I know you're going to have several answers for. It's called, Have You Read Any Good Books Lately?
Oh, my.
And you are a true readophile. You know, you read quite a lot, and you are influenced by several people. In the previous thing, you were referencing Edmund Burke, you know, who is not Senator Dave Burke, but an Englishman who's been, you know, not been with us for about 300 years. So, tell us, what books have you read recently?
Well, actually, reading a book right now that's really interesting. It's The Black Swan. It's
Yes.
by Nassim Nicholas Taleb, and it's a fascinating book because one of the things you realize is people really think that we all, I think we all sometimes think we know more than we actually do. And the blind spot, the real blind spots that we have aren't the things that we know that we don't know, because at least we're cognizant of that and we kind of are on the lookout for it. It really truly is, and I know this sounds a little bit like Donald Rumsfeld, but the unknown unknowns. Because those are the most dangerous things, and they exist. And they're going to happen, and and these things, they may be, if you look at the bell curve, they're outside of the statistical bell curve.
Right.
But these events, yeah, they may be rare, but they can be so large that they can have a dramatic impact on whether it's the economy. And we're talking, and when I mean a black swan, these are events basically that come out that people don't anticipate. They can be economic events, they can be everything from wars to pandemics, they can be good things, or they can be a new product that comes along and that makes somebody a multi-billionaire in a year or two because of the
Disruptive
power of
technologies.
Disruptive.
Yeah.
And the important thing is we have a real challenge, I think, in America and Ohio as well. Ohio's had a really rough economy and a lot of challenges. We need to make ourselves more robust to defend against the inevitability of the unknown.
Now, here's the juxtaposition question for you. Now, you are a conservative who's here talking about rapid change.
That's true. Sometimes that might seem like an oxymoron.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, this concludes our conversations this week with Greg Lawson of the Buckeye Institute, and thank you very much for coming on board and agreeing to do this with us.
Thank you very much.
And tune in next week. We'll be talking to more people around Ohio who know how things work. Thank you.
For more about the Center for Community Solutions or their publications, please visit www.communitysolutions.com.